make your donors feel appreciated. In this workshop, we're going to talk about a few things. First, kind of talk about the dynamics of financial leadership. Who are your financial leaders? What is their perspective on giving and generosity? And what are their expectations from the organizations that they support? We're going to talk about donor retention and some of the challenges that we face there. That has typically been a nonprofit challenge. Donor retention is a big topic within that community, but it's now becoming something that our churches are looking at. How many of you are thinking about engagement? That's a real buzzword these days, post-COVID. So knowing how to keep your donors engaged and actively involved, both physically and financially. And then we're also going to talk about a plan for engaging those whose investments, your high potential donors, your financial leadership, how to help you to make ministry possible. So those are going to be kind of our key points today. Here's just a couple of things to talk about. What is our current reality? And none of this is particularly uplifting, but hopefully within the context of this, we'll give you some tools that you can use to kind of fight against some of this current reality. First of all, take a look at these numbers and see if it resonates for you in your context. Most churches, 10% of donors give about 50% of total revenue. And in many of those cases, those donors are aging out. And so this is a real concern for many of our churches and faith-based nonprofits. 50% of donors give less than 5% of the total. So you've got a lot of people contributing very little resources, but certainly availing themselves of all the resources you provide. 30 to 50% in most churches, their members give nothing at all. So if you don't know these statistics, I would encourage you to take a look at those numbers within your church and see if you match up. In churches and faith-based nonprofits, there's an experience where about 50 to 60% of first-time donors never give again. This is part of that donor retention problem, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Helpful to know that research says that donors typically stop giving about 3 to 6 months before they leave. So if you've got some people that haven't given in the last 3 to 6 months, that have typically given maybe monthly or weekly or however they would typically contribute, that might be an indication that there's something going on and that there might be a pastoral concern, or they may be planning to leave your church. So will give you a heads up that there's something going on. Also, in most churches, pledging households, the number of pledging households are declining. Now, you're going to know this, probably a good number of you are taking are in the midst of your annual campaigns right now. And so within the next couple of months, you're going to know whether pledging households are declining. If you find that they are declining, it might be helpful to know that you're not alone, but we're also going to give you some tools here to talk about how to engage people in ways that don't necessarily always involve pledging. We focused an awful lot in the church on pledging income, and we're really going to need to be a little bit more creative in how we approach donors, and hopefully we'll give you some ideas of how to do that. So this diagram here, I'm going to flesh it out piece by piece, but this is what Horizons calls the integrated church funding model. Let's jump right into building donor relationships. This, I have to say, while it's not the most important of the disciplines, it's probably my favorite to talk about, because I think it's just so crucial to growing generosity in our churches. And it really speaks to the relationship between the donor and the organization. So relationships really matter, and they matter to donors, and they matter to the church's future. So when somebody makes a gift to the church or your nonprofit for the first time, they're signaling to you that they want to have a relationship. They say, hey, I like what I'm seeing. I'm invested. I want to become invested in what you're doing. I want to see you do more of what you're doing. And so I'm going to provide some financial support. What happens next after that donor makes that first-time contribution really matters to the relationship. Do they get an acknowledgement? Do they get an email? Are they able to easily retrieve information about what they've contributed before? All those things make a difference. And one of the things that makes the biggest difference is expressing gratitude. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute, but gratitude is really a key part of continuing to build those donor relationships. If you're looking at your giving, particularly at the end of your pledge period this year, and you kind of take a look at where you were last year, you want to ask yourself, is donor attrition a problem? Are we struggling to retain our donors, or do we pretty much have the same donor pool as we had last year? Really important to know and understand when people drop out, what's the reason for that, and how do we fix that if it's fixable? We also, as an organization, often don't understand what donors really want from the organization that they serve, and often don't think about it from the donor's perspective. There's a woman by the name of Penelope Burke, and I'm going to share with you just a moment some of her research. She's researched and spoken to 500,000 or more donors in the last few years about what they want and expect from the donors, from the organizations that they contribute to. And I think her research is really, really useful to us in the church. It should be a very natural extension of the relationships that we already have and love in our churches. But I'm going to share with you some of her research in just a minute, and hopefully that'll be useful in building your donor relationships. Here's some challenges to building donor relationships. First of all, we've seen huge growth in the number of 501c3 or nonprofit organizations, and they have been very aggressive about attracting donors who may also be your donors. Over the last 10 years, there's been a 10% increase in the number of charitable organizations, which is very significant. Most of our donors are giving to multiple charities. It used to be that the church was at the top of that list, the top priority. I'm going to say to you now that that's probably not the case. It may be in some, but for many donors, the church does not get the bulk of those philanthropic dollars. There's still that lack of engagement left over from COVID. Some churches are reporting better than pre-COVID numbers, while others are still struggling to get people fully back into worship. And then finally, that lack of understanding or lack of ability to share that story of impact. Many donors, again, or churches think that their donors really understand what their impact is in the communities that they're serving, but telling your impact story in a meaningful and compelling way will enable you to see additional gifts. All right, how do we do this relationship building? So first of all, what I mentioned before about many of your donors are seeing gifts or are giving gifts to many other nonprofit organizations. Wouldn't it be wonderful to know what those other organizations are? So for example, maybe somebody who's a member of your church has a deep interest in and maybe gives resources to maybe the Boys and Girls Club or something like that. Well, that lets you know that they have a passion for children's ministry, right? It lets you know that this is something that they find meaningful. So when you have a remodeling of your children's and youth spaces, wouldn't that be a wonderful way to engage that donor in conversation, because you know that that person cares about that? Maybe somebody sits on a board of the local symphony, for example. Knowing that enables you to understand that that person has a love of music. And so and the type of music also. So when your organ needs refurbished, wouldn't it be a wonderful opportunity to invite that donor to become a part of that? And so knowing what the donor's philanthropic passions and interests are outside of your organization can really help you to understand how you might engage them in a meaningful way in some of the projects that you're doing currently in your church. Churches often fail, and I'm not sure why. They fail to say thank you. Many churches take pledges, don't ever send a thank you note. They might get their statement right in January. They get their first quarterly statement. But nobody ever thanks them for making their contribution. Penelope Burke's research says that donors want to be thanked promptly personally and powerfully. I'm going to dive into that a little bit more in a few more slides, but keep that in mind. We need to be thanking more than we're asking, and think about the balance in your church. Are you asking more than thanking? Then maybe you're out of balance. Donor-centric gratitude expressed to ministry and financial leaders in particular. These are the people that keep your ministries humming. Your ministry leaders are the people that serve on your committees. They serve on your boards. They serve in all different ways. Sunday school teachers, running your Sunday school classes. Your financial leaders, and there's clearly going to be some overlap. Your financial leaders are those people who are making your ministry possible financially. So when you look at your giving list, they're those people that are invested heavily and in a meaningful way in your ministries. Important always to remember that no matter what the gift size is, every gift counts, every gift is important, and every giver matters. So keeping that in mind and keeping that as part of your messaging is really important as you engage in some of these relationship building strategies. All right, here's the Penelope Burke stuff that I mentioned earlier. She has a couple of books around this topic called donor centricity. I would highly recommend them both. She also has a website where you can find her information as well. But, often in the church, we think that people want recognition. They want a pin or a plaque or, a legacy wall or something like that. Well, her research has been quite enlightening to me, and I think this is played out in my understanding of donors. This is one of the things that she says in her book, that 80% of donors say a beautifully crafted thank you received promptly is all it takes for donors to want to give again. Now imagine, we think that they want all kinds of hoops and things, and sometimes they do, but 80% would give again if only they received a beautiful thank you note. So let's talk about what a beautiful thank you note might look like. And I always use the analogy of remember, writing letters to your grandmother after she sent you a birthday check or cash, probably back in the day. So this is kind of the essence of what we're getting at here. First of all, it's got to be personal. I can't say dear member, dear friend of the church. Even if you're writing these for hundreds of people, please avail yourself of mail merge. It is not that hard. And dear member is just not going to fly. It tells your donors that you really don't know who they are. You're really not sure who you're writing to, that they're not important enough to be personally addressed. So please be sure that everything that you write, it has a member's name on it. We're not talking about a whole book to write to your donors. Something quick, a couple of paragraphs, not 2 pages worth. This is quick. Grandma doesn't have all day. She just wants to know that you got the gift and that you appreciate the gift. This next one is really subtle, but I think is so key. Focus on the donor, not on the gift. So when you're writing the thank you note, you don't want to say, dear grandma, thank you for the $50, right? We want to say, dear grandma, thank you so much for your generosity. Thank you so much for the lovely gift that you sent. Thank you so much for remembering me on my birthday. So focus on the donor and what the donor has done, not the gift itself. If you use the word you rather than the word your, you'll find that you can write those thank you notes even better. Again, personally signed. So make sure that the person that you're writing to knows who sent the note. Sometimes it could be from the pastor. Sometimes it could be from your staff person who's doing finances. Sometimes it could be a volunteer. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the volunteer has to know the giving amount. Remember, this is an expression of gratitude for their generosity. This is not a confirmation of the gift amount, but this is just a thank you for their generosity and their participation in helping fund the ministries of the church. A really good thank you note is 100% gratitude and 0% ask. Do not fall prey to the belief that we can just put a little PS in there and ask for another gift, or the subtlety of just enclosing a return envelope. No, people understand why you've enclosed the return envelope. So 100% gratitude, 0% ask. That's all this letter is about, is saying thank you. If you've got time in your thank you note to tell an impact story, just connect the ministry that you're able to do with the dollars that that particular donor has provided. Tell a quick story about some wonderful ministry that's happening. Again, no gimmicks, no PSs, no little stickers, no fun things like that. If you have to scratch out dear member and write their name in, a lot of people think that's okay. It's really not okay. It just means you've made a mistake and you've got to scratch it out and write their name in. So make it personal, no gimmicks. Don't continue to try to sell. This donor has already bought in. So just express thank you and make sure that each thank you note is different and authentic, comes from the heart every single time. Several churches that we work with have created teams of people whose job it is to continue to build a gratitude culture in the church and to say thank you. So this is one of the most impactful ways that you can build donor relationships with donors of all giving levels. Again, this is only about financial generosity that we're talking about today, but you can use a similar strategy for your volunteer support. Those people are contributing significantly as well. And so writing a lovely donor-centered thank you note can also be very, very meaningful to those folks. There's more stuff about donor-centric thank you notes and a donor-centric perspective on Giving 365. So take a look there and hopefully you'll find some additional resources. All right, moving on. Understanding donors' passions and interests. Often, we go about our life day in the church and we don't really ask people for their questions or input. We sort of hold that maybe within staff. But one of the ways that we can really invest in our people is by asking them to invest emotionally as well as financially in the ministry that we're doing. For example, you've probably got people in your church who are small business owners, professionals, executives. These are some smart people. These are people that understand how to build things and how to grow things. So why not ask for their input when you're ready to consider a project? Perhaps you have a new building project that you're thinking about, and you want to, you're debating about some various options for how to build out this new parish hall. For example, maybe invite some of these small business owners, these financial leaders together for a little get together and say, here's what we're planning. Here's what we're talking about. What do you think? How does that sound to you? Would that be something you would be interested in? Ask for their feedback and support. You can also ask them questions about, what brings them joy. These are great one-on-one conversations with some prospective lead gift donors. Sit down and have coffee and ask them, what keeps you up at night? What brings you joy? These are really, really important ways to build authentic donor relationships. You may also know something about their philanthropy, the other things that they give to, if you're asking those kinds of good questions. And maybe you ask them, what are your philanthropic goals? How can we help you achieve them? Maybe the projects that you've put in front of the congregation are just a little bit too small. Maybe they want to do something big. So work with them to try to figure out how your vision can intersect with the donor's passions. And then you've got a really, really great and productive conversation. One of the other tools that you can avail yourself of is wealth screening. Horizons has a product that we call CPI, which stands for capacity, propensity, and interest. And basically what we do is you provide us with a list of your donors in your church, and we provide some information based on publicly available data that helps you to get to know them better. It helps you to understand their capacity. Are they capable of making $1 million gift? or are they more capable of making a $10,000 gift? We can provide that kind of guidance for you. We also might know if that donor sits on on boards, either a public board or private board. Again, that helps you to understand maybe where their philanthropic objectives lie. We also can help you to determine which of your donors might be good planned giving prospects. And so doing this CPI research really enables you to get to know your donors better. Now, that's not to say that you're going to invite Christine Miller over for coffee and say, hey, I understand that you're capable of making $1 million gift. Let's talk. No, that's not what we're talking about here. But when you have people in your congregation that you don't maybe know very well, or you just like to know a little bit more about them, we can help you to understand more deeply their financial capacity, as well as some of the areas in which they're interested, so that you can continue to build those relationships and have those conversations. So CPI is an extremely useful tool. We always love that when we're with a church or a nonprofit, particularly as happens in nonprofits, somebody will say, oh, I have a friend of a friend of a friend who knows Oprah, and Oprah's got a lot of money, and that's great. But if Oprah has never heard of your organization, Oprah is unlikely to present herself as a substantial donor to your cause. So we need to discover who the people are within our midst who are already known to us, who have the capacity, the propensity, and interest to help make ministry happen. Donor retention. Again, I talked about this a little bit earlier. Most charities lose donors. The retention rate is astronomical, and it's been even worse since COVID. One of the reasons why first-time donors, if you don't have a first-time donor strategy, this is a really, really crucial way that you can help to retain your donors. Of those who contribute, only 10% are still contributing after 5 years, a key donor retention problem. So the goal of a first-time donor strategy is to build those relationships that continue to deepen their connection with the church or nonprofit, and help you to see them through to a very, very high, what they call lifetime donor value. So donor retention is really important. So we're going to talk a minute about what does a first-time donor strategy look like. If you don't already have one, I encourage you to think about this. And we've got some resources on Giving 365 that can help you, or we can certainly help you with that at Horizons. But the first thing, again, remember what Penelope Burke said: prompt, personal, and powerful. So when a donor makes a gift for the first time, be sure to express gratitude, make it donor-centric, let them know how much you value them and their participation in the life of the church. Let them know that they're appreciated. Second thing is share the impact. Let them know that with the resources that they provided, that you were able to do great ministry as a result. Tell a quick story and let them know what their funds were able to accomplish. And again, don't ask until you've said thank you. There's some research that suggests that the number one reason why first-time donors don't make a second gift is because they were asked for a second gift before they were even thanked for the first one. So make sure that you're expressing gratitude promptly, that the note is personal, and that you share a powerful impact story that will really resonate for your donor. Building donor relationships, we're talking about authentic, deep relationships. They're key to growing all types of giving, whether that's annual giving, planned giving, capital giving, or special giving. Really important to all. I'm sorry for you pastors that are on the webinar today. Your involvement is really crucial to this, and I know that you don't have the time. But one of my clergy friends said to me, we just have to figure out how to make the time. It's just that important. People that are making financial contributions that are substantial and are meaningful for them relative to their means expect that the pastor is going to be the one who's going to express gratitude, who's going to build that relationship, who's going to be involved in the conversation. So it's not something that you can delegate, certainly not in its entirety. The pastor absolutely needs to be involved in these crucial conversations. Knowing your donors well creates an opportunity to connect. Again, I have a pastor friend who finds every opportunity to make a connection, even if it's brief. They have a pickup delivery food service at the church, and people will drive through and he will actually be in the line talking to people as they're waiting for their food to be delivered to their cars. How was your doctor's appointment? How was Jimmy's test last week? All of these things, and he's finding ways to make those connections, to just build those relationships and have a personal relationship with his donors. All right, your financial leaders, we talked about, this is just sort of some definitions of financial leaders. Your financial leaders, and it will depend a bit on the size of your church and what your giving list looks like, but your financial leaders are typically those people who are giving roughly about 50% of the resources to your church. In most churches, that's roughly 10% of donors are providing about 50% of your annual contributions. So take a look at your giving list and see where those financial leaders are. These are people who are very heavily invested in day-to-day ministries of your church. They respond extremely well to personal relationships and personal communication. Make sure that they're not the last to learn about things like staff changes or financial shortfalls or financial overages or big gifts. If there's a meaningful event happen in the life of your church, make sure financial leaders get to hear that directly from you and not get to hear about it from, parking lot gossip. High capacity donors, these are people who may or may not be already heavily invested as financial leaders in your church, but who have the capacity to make substantial contributions to your annual ministry. Some of the questions to ask them, again, what keeps you up at night, or how would you solve this problem? Again, they're high capacity donors because they have the ability to generate wealth. And so finding ways to engage them, involve them, you'll probably get some really great feedback and information as well. And then first time donors, quick response can really help to shape the rest of that relationship and to build that connection that those first-time donors are expressing that they want when they make that first-time contribution to the church. All right, before we go to Q&A, just a couple of last words. I don't know if any of you out there, Tom Peters fans, he's one of my favorites, and he's bold, he's brazen, he says what's on his mind, and I appreciate some of that candor. But he says leaders want to do stuff that matters. They're great at inducing others to take novel journeys to places of surpassing importance. This is the kind of conversation that your financial leaders and high capacity donors want to have with you. How can you help them go on a novel journey to places of surpassing importance because they're helping you to make an impact in the world? Really, really wonderful imagery there. And then Tom Bolsinger, often he says this, what often gets overlooked in discussions of grit and perseverance is how pervasively important is the power of relationships to help us build tenacity. Strong relationships help generate additional relationships and connection within your church. You can help build some really meaningful relationships within your church by initiating those conversations. All right, folks, thank you so much for your time today. This has been fun. I hope you found something of interest here and something you can take back home to your church and put it to use immediately. And if we can help you in any way at Horizons, please let us know. We support you and would love to help in any way we can.